The night was cold. The rain had been falling for hours, covering the streets of Erythra Colony with puddles that reflected the dull glow of broken streetlights. The wind pushed sheets of water through the narrow lanes, making every shadow shiver. Under a bent sheet of metal, a small figure sat curled up, hugging her knees. Her name was Lyra. Her thin skin was covered in patches of dirt, and her small frame shook from the cold. She had no blanket, no shoes. The only thing she wore was an old, torn piece of cloth that did not cover her properly. She had been there for 2 days. People passed her by, aliens with bright robes, traders pulling carts, guards in heavy coats. But no one stopped. Some looked away. Others walked faster. On this world, an orphan like Lyra was invisible. She had once had a home. It was a small, noisy place filled with the smell of warm food and the voices of her parents. But the fire had taken that away. She had escaped the flames, but her parents had not. The colony officials sent her to a work shelter, but she had run away from there. The work was hard, the food was little, and the voices were cold. Now she had nothing, not even hope. Far away, in a cleaner part of the colony, a human named Daniel Hale walked down the road. He was tall, with dark hair tucked under a hood, and his jacket carried the logo of the Human Relief Corps, a group that came to alien colonies to bring food, medicine, and help where it was needed. Daniel had been here for 3 months. He knew this place was harsh for the poor, but even he was not prepared for what he saw when he passed the broken shelter. At first, he thought it was a bundle of rags. Then he saw movement, a head lifting, eyes wide and sharp like a frightened animal. The rain dripped down her face, and her small hands clutched the cloth around her as if it were the last thing she owned. Daniel slowed his steps. Something in her eyes made him stop completely. He knelt a little, keeping his voice soft. "Hey there. Are you okay?" The girl did not answer. She stared at him, ready to run if he came closer. "It's all right," Daniel said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you." Still no answer. The wind pushed a cold splash of rain across her face, and she shivered. Daniel looked around. The street was busy enough that no one paid attention to them. He sighed, pulling off the outer layer of his jacket. "Here," he said, holding it out. The girl hesitated, her eyes moving from the jacket to his face. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and took it. The heavy fabric swallowed her small frame, but she pulled it tight around herself. "Better?" Daniel asked. She gave the smallest nod. Daniel knew he couldn't just leave her there. The Human Relief Corps had a small station nearby. Nothing fancy, just a few rooms with supplies for emergencies. He offered his hand. "Come on. Let's get you somewhere warm." The girl looked at his hand but didn't take it. She stood on her own, still clutching the jacket, and followed him from a safe distance. They walked through twisting streets until they reached a low building with a faded human flag painted on the wall. Daniel opened the door, and warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of broth and dry blankets. Inside, a few other human workers looked up in surprise. Daniel explained quickly. "Found her outside in the rain. She needs dry clothes and food." One of the workers, a kind woman named Mara, hurried to the storage crate and pulled out a clean set of simple clothes. She handed them to Lyra, who stared at them as if they were made of gold. "These are yours," Mara said warmly. "You can change in there." She pointed to a small washroom. When Lyra returned, she looked almost like a different person. The clothes were loose, but they were clean and warm. Her wet hair clung to her face, and she kept her eyes low, but Daniel could see a hint of relief in her movements. Daniel set a steaming bowl of broth in front of her. "Eat," he said. At first, Lyra only held the spoon. Then she took a small sip. The warmth spread through her, and she began eating faster, almost afraid it would disappear. Daniel said nothing, letting her eat until the bowl was empty. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and unsure. Daniel smiled. "You're welcome. What's your name?" "Lyra," she answered. "Well, Lyra, you're safe here, at least for tonight." Her eyes flickered with something, not quite trust yet, but no longer fear. That night, after Lyra had fallen asleep on a small cot, Daniel sat in the corner, thinking. He knew the colony had no real system for helping orphans. Most were sent to labor programs where they would work for years with little hope of freedom. If he turned her over to the local authorities, she would disappear into that system. He couldn't let that happen. Daniel leaned back in his chair, listening to the rain on the roof. Somewhere deep inside, a decision was already forming. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he was going to make sure Lyra had more than just one warm night. For the first time in a long while, Lyra dreamed without fear. Hook for Part 2, Daniels. Act of kindness sets him on a path that will put him at odds with the colony's rules, and possibly his own mission orders. The morning light in Erythra Colony was weak, filtered through dusty clouds and the faint red haze of the planet's thin atmosphere. Inside the Human Relief Corps station, the air smelled faintly of broth and clean blankets. Daniel woke early, as he always did, but his first thought wasn't about his work schedule. It was about Lyra. She was still asleep on the small cot, curled under 2 blankets. Her breathing was slow, and for the first time since he had met her, her face looked peaceful. Daniel almost didn't want to wake her, but when the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen drifted in, Lyra stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she looked confused, as if unsure if this warmth was real. "Morning," Daniel said softly. She sat up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "It's still here," she whispered. "What is?" "The warmth." Daniel smiled. "It's not going anywhere. Come on. Breakfast is ready." In the small kitchen, Mara was already pouring tea and setting bread on the table. Lyra sat, quietly, glancing around as if everything here was strange and new. She ate slowly this time, no longer afraid the food would vanish, but still with a quiet hunger that made Daniel's heart ache. After breakfast, Daniel brought out something unexpected, a thin, colorful book. The cover showed a smiling human child holding the paw of a round, friendly creature. Lyra tilted her head. "What is that?" "It's a storybook," Daniel explained. "Humans give these to their children to read. Have you ever seen one before?" She shook her head. Daniel opened the first page and pointed to the simple drawings. "This one is called The Little Explorer. It's about a kid who travels to faraway places helping others." He read the first few lines slowly, then showed her the words. "Here, try reading the first sentence." Lyra frowned. I don't know your letters." "That's okay," Daniel said with a gentle smile. "I can teach you." The morning passed quietly. Daniel showed her the shapes of the letters, their sounds, and the way they fit into words. Lyra's voice was soft at first, stumbling over the strange human words, but little by little she grew more confident. When she read her first full sentence, she looked up at him in surprise. "I did it. You did," Daniel said proudly. "See? You're a natural." For the first time since he met her, she smiled, a small smile, but real. But outside the relief station, not everyone was smiling. The colony had a way of watching newcomers, especially humans. As Daniel left the building to check supply deliveries, 2 alien traders whispered to each other and glanced toward the station door. "Did you see? He has one of them in there. A street orphan. Dangerous. They should be sent to the labor program before they cause trouble." The words were quiet, but Daniel caught the tone. He didn't respond. He knew the rumors would start spreading. Later, That day, Daniel brought Lyra a set of small colored pencils from the supply crate. "These are for you," he said. "You can draw anything you like." She looked at the pencils as though they were magic. The first thing she drew was a crooked, smiling creature with round ears. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "A dog," she replied. "You told me humans have them. I've never seen one." Daniel laughed. "That's a very good dog." Lyra smiled again, but this time it reached her eyes. That night, after dinner, Daniel sat with Mara in the storage room, checking the food stock. Mara glanced toward the main hall, where Lyra was curled up with the storybook. "She's a sweet one," Mara said. "But you know the rules. If the colony officials find her here, they'll take her." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know. But I'm not handing her over to that labor camp." "You can't save them all, Daniel," Mara said gently. "Maybe not," Daniel replied, "but I can save her." The next day, trouble arrived sooner than expected. A tall figure in a dark green coat stepped into the relief station. His skin was a pale blue, and his eyes were cold. He carried a data pad and wore the insignia of the colony's welfare division. "I am here about a missing child," the official said flatly. His gaze swept the room. "An orphan female of the Lyran species. Thin, small, about 12 years old. Have you seen anyone matching this description?" Daniel felt his heart beat faster. Lyra was in the back room, reading quietly. He forced a calm tone. "We see a lot of people come through here, officer. What has she done?" "She is required by law to be placed in a labor program for the good of the colony," the official said. "If you have her here, you are withholding property of the state." Daniel's jaw tightened. Property of the state. The words made his stomach turn. "I'll keep an eye out," Daniel said coolly. "If I see her, I'll let you know." The official studied him for a long moment, as if searching his face for weakness. Then he turned and left, his boots splashing through the puddles outside. When Daniel returned to the back room, Lyra looked up from her book. "Who was that?" "No one important," Daniel said, forcing a smile. But inside, his thoughts were racing. The colony knew she was missing. They would search for her. Lyra set the book down. "You don't have to help me anymore. It's dangerous for you." Daniel knelt, so his eyes were level with hers. "Lyra, you're not a danger to me, and you're not going back to that camp. I promise." Her eyes softened, but she still looked uncertain. "Why? Why are you helping me?" Daniel's answer was simple. "Because you deserve more than just surviving. You deserve a life." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but the sound of distant machinery filled the air. The colony never truly rested. He sat by the window, looking out at the faint glow of the streets, and began to make plans. If he was going to keep his promise, he would need to act soon. Hook for Part 3. Daniel's efforts to help Lyra learn and heal grow stronger, but so does the colony's suspicion, and the net around them begins to close. The days that followed passed quietly, at least on the surface. Outside, the colony continued its restless rhythm of noise and work. Inside the Human Relief Corps station, Daniel tried to give Lyra something she hadn't had in a long time: stability. Every morning began with a simple breakfast, then an hour of reading. Lyra sat at the wooden table, tracing her finger under each word. At first, she still stumbled on some sounds, but Daniel never rushed her. "Good," he would say after she finished a sentence. "You're getting faster." One morning, she read a whole page without stopping. She looked up at him with wide eyes as if she couldn't believe she had done it. Daniel smiled. "See, told you you could do it." In the afternoons, Daniel gave her small tasks: sorting medical supplies, labeling food packets, counting blankets. She did each job carefully, almost too carefully, as if afraid she might break something. "You don't have to be so tense," Daniel told her once. It's okay if you make a mistake. We all do. She hesitated. At the camp, if you made a mistake, they took food away. Daniel's chest tightened at her words. Well, here it's different. No one will take your food away for a mistake. She gave a small nod, though he could see the doubt in her eyes. Trust, Daniel knew, would take time. One afternoon, Daniel brought her a small, battered music player. This, he said, is an old Earth device. It plays songs. Lyra tilted her head. What are songs? Daniel chuckled. Something that makes your heart feel lighter. He pressed a button, and soft notes filled the air. The gentle strum of a guitar, followed by a warm human voice singing about sunlight and journeys. Lyra's eyes widened. She sat very still, listening as if she was afraid the sound might vanish. When the song ended, she whispered, It feels warm inside. That's what music does, Daniel said. You can listen to it any time you like, but outside their little bubble of peace, the colony's suspicion was growing. 2 days later, Daniel was walking back from the market with a sack of vegetables when he heard his name. He turned to see Joran, a local trader he had spoken with before. You've been spending a lot of time with that girl, Joran said in a low tone. Daniel kept his face neutral. She's helping out at the station. Joran shook his head. Word is the welfare division is looking for her. They say she's a runaway. If they find her with you, you could lose your work permit. I'll keep that in mind, Daniel said calmly, but his steps quickened after that. That evening, Daniel found Lyra sitting by the window, sketching in her notebook. She had drawn the station's front door with 2 figures standing in front, one tall, one small. That us? Daniel asked, smiling. Lyra nodded shyly. You made me look better than I do in real life, he teased. Her smile flickered but stayed. For Daniel, it was a quiet victory. Each smile meant she was stepping a little further away from the fear that had controlled her life. Still, the unease in the air was hard to ignore. 2 relief workers from another district stopped by that week. Daniel overheard them talking in the storage room. They say the welfare officers will start inspecting stations next week, one said. Daniel's stomach knotted. He knew what that meant. They would search every corner, check every record, and if Lyra was found, she would be taken. The next morning, he decided to take her out for a walk before the station got busy. They walked through the quieter parts of the colony, where small gardens grew between buildings and the air smelled of fresh leaves instead of smoke. This is the North District, Daniel explained. Humans helped build these gardens for the colony. Lyra touched one of the bright red flowers carefully, as if it were a rare jewel. It's beautiful. Beauty matters, Daniel said softly. Even in places like this. For a while, they sat on a bench, just watching the small alien birds hopping between branches. Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders slowly melt away. But peace didn't last long. As they were heading back, Daniel spotted a group of welfare officers at the far end of the street. They were questioning a shopkeeper, showing him an image on a datapad. Daniel's instincts kicked in. Lyra, stay close to me, he said quietly. They took a side street, moving quickly but not running. Daniel kept glancing over his shoulder until they reached the station again. Only when the door closed behind them did he let out a slow breath. Lyra looked at him, her eyes sharp. They're looking for me, aren't they? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but they're not going to find you. Why not? She asked. Because, Daniel said firmly, I won't let them. That night, Lyra sat on the cot, hugging her knees. Daniel noticed her quietness and sat down across from her. I'm sorry, she said suddenly. I didn't want to cause you trouble. You're not causing trouble, Daniel replied. You're reminding me why I'm here, to help people who need it. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. No one has ever said that to me before. Daniel reached over and set the small pendant he always carried on the table. Between them, a silver disc engraved with a tiny star. "This belonged to my sister," he said. "She used to say that even the smallest light can be seen in the dark." Lyra touched the pendant gently. "It's pretty. Keep it," Daniel said. "So you remember, you are not alone." As the rain began again outside, Daniel knew the days ahead would be harder. The colony was watching. The officers were searching. But as he looked at Lyra, holding the pendant with both hands, he also knew one thing for certain. She was smiling again, and he would do anything to keep that smile from fading. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the colony streets damp and shining under the weak morning light. Inside the Human Relief Corps station, the air was still. Daniel stood at the front desk, sorting supply forms, while Lyra quietly read her storybook at the table. It was almost peaceful, until the door opened. A tall figure stepped inside, his shadow stretching across the floor. Daniel recognized him instantly, the welfare officer from before. His pale blue skin caught the light, and his eyes were as cold as the day Daniel had first seen them. "Good morning," the officer said flatly. "I am here for an inspection." Daniel's hand stilled on the papers. "Of course," he replied, keeping his voice calm. The officer's gaze swept the room. "I have been told you may be sheltering an orphan who has escaped state custody." Daniel forced himself not to glance at Lyra. "We have many visitors here," he said. "You'll have to be more specific." The officer stepped closer. "A Lyran female, thin, about 12 years old. If she is here, you must surrender her immediately. It is the law." Daniel's mind worked fast. If the officer saw Lyra now, she would be taken. There would be no chance to stop it. "Feel free to check the storage area," Daniel said, hoping his steady tone didn't betray his thoughts. "I'll unlock it for you." The officer nodded sharply. As soon as the man turned toward the storage door, Daniel moved. "Lyra," he whispered urgently, leaning toward her. "Go to the back room, the one with the cleaning supplies. Don't make a sound. Stay there until I come for you." Her eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. Clutching her book, she slipped quietly toward the back, her footsteps muffled by the old floor mats. Daniel opened the storage room for the officer, letting him check crates of food, medicine, and blankets. The officer took his time, scanning every corner with a sharp, suspicious gaze. "Nothing unusual here," Daniel said lightly, though his heart was pounding. The officer grunted but did not leave. Instead, he began inspecting the kitchen, then the hallway. His eyes lingered on every closed door. Daniel stepped in his way casually, trying to guide him toward the exit. "We keep living quarters separate from storage. No one unauthorized is allowed back there." "Is that so?" the officer replied, clearly unconvinced. Just then, Mara entered, carrying a stack of folded blankets. "Oh, I didn't know. We had visitors," she said brightly. Daniel gave her a quick look, one that said, "Play along." The officer straightened. "You will both be questioned if we find you are hiding the girl." Mara's voice stayed calm. "We follow the station's rules. We help those in need. But we also respect the law." The officer's gaze shifted between them. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air filter. Then he stepped back toward the door. "This is not over," he said coldly. "We will be back." When the door closed, Daniel let out the breath he'd been holding. He went to the back and found Lyra crouched behind a stack of supply crates. "It's okay," he said softly. "He's gone." Lyra stood, but her face was pale. "They're going to come again, aren't they?" "Yes," Daniel admitted. "And next time they might not leave without searching every corner." She looked at the floor. "Maybe I should go. If they catch me here, you'll lose your work." Daniel crouched so they were eye level. Lyra, listen to me. I made a promise. I'm not letting them take you back to that camp. But to keep that promise, we need to be smart. What do we do? She asked quietly. We find a way to get you out of the colony, Daniel said. The idea hung in the air. Leaving the colony was not simple. Ships required permits, identity checks, and credits. Lyra had none of those. But Daniel was already thinking of options. Cargo shipments, sympathetic pilots, even falsified paperwork. That evening, Daniel began making calls to old contacts, speaking in careful, coded language. Mara noticed. You're really going to do this, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. It's the only way to keep her safe. You know if they find out, you'll be banned from every colony under this sector. I know, he said, his voice firm. But I can live with that. I couldn't live with knowing I sent her back. The next few days were tense. Daniel kept Lyra inside most of the time, except for short walks at dawn when the streets were quiet. At night, they worked on her reading and drawing, trying to keep life as normal as possible. But even Lyra could feel the tension. Why are you so quiet? She asked one evening. Daniel looked at her. Because I'm thinking of the best way to get you somewhere safe. She hesitated. And then, will I ever see you again? Daniel paused, then said gently, I'll make sure you have a place where you're safe, cared for, and free. If I can, I'll visit. But even if I can't, I'll know you're okay. The next morning, the tension turned into danger. Daniel was repairing a broken heater when the station's alarm beeped, the signal for a visitor at the door. He glanced at the security screen and felt his stomach drop. 3 welfare officers stood outside. Lyra, he said sharply, hide, now. She disappeared into the back room without another word. Daniel opened the door, blocking most of the entrance with his body. We have orders to search the premises, the lead officer said. Stand aside. Daniel's mind raced. He knew they wouldn't take no for an answer this time. He stepped back slowly. Fine, but you won't find what you're looking for. The officers spread out, opening doors, peering into cupboards, even checking under tables. Daniel kept close to the hallway that led to Lyra's hiding place, ready to distract them if they came too near. One officer started walking that way. Daniel acted fast, dropping a box of medical bottles loudly in the kitchen. The crash drew all their attention. Oops, he said casually. Guess I'm clumsy today. The moment they were distracted, Mara slipped quietly into the hallway and guided Lyra into a hidden compartment behind the supply crates, a spot only the staff knew about. After half an hour, the officers left, frustrated. We'll be watching you, the lead one warned. When the door shut, Daniel turned to Lyra. We can't wait anymore. We move soon. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. I trust you. Daniel felt the weight of her words. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. Hook for Part 5. Daniel begins the risky escape plan, but every step toward freedom brings new dangers, and the colony's net is closing fast. The night sky over Erythra Colony was heavy with clouds hiding the stars. The streets were quieter than usual, but Daniel knew that didn't mean they were safe. The welfare officers had increased patrols in recent days, and their checkpoints could appear anywhere. Inside the Human Relief Corps station, Lyra sat at the table, wearing the oversized human jacket Daniel had given her. She kept pulling the hood up and down, her small hands fidgeting with the fabric. Are you ready? Daniel asked softly. She nodded, though he could see the nervousness in her eyes. Once we leave, we can't come back, he warned. It might take hours to reach the spaceport. We'll need to move fast and stay out of sight. I understand, Lyra said. Her voice was quiet but steady. Daniel had spent the last 2 days preparing. He had arranged for them to join a supply run that was scheduled to deliver food to a market district near the spaceport. From there, they would try to slip into the restricted loading area and board a human transport ship. The plan was risky. The colony guards checked cargo lists, and even one wrong glance could give them away. But it was the only chance they had. Before they left, Mara came over and handed Lyra a small cloth bag. "Some bread and dried fruit," she said with a warm smile, "in case you get hungry." Lyra accepted it carefully, as if it were a precious gift. "Thank you." Mara looked at Daniel. "Take care of her, and take care of yourself." "Will," Daniel promised. They stepped into the night, the damp air carrying the faint smell of metal and rain. Daniel led Lyra through narrow back alleys, avoiding the main roads where patrols usually passed. The cargo truck was waiting at a small loading dock, its engine humming quietly. The driver, a human named Harris, gave Daniel a brief nod. "Get in the back. Stay low. I'll cover you on the paperwork." Daniel helped Lyra climb in, then followed. The truck was half filled with crates of packaged meals and medical kits. They found a space between two tall stacks and crouched down, the doors closed, plunging them into near darkness. The engine rumbled, and the truck began to move. For a while, the ride was smooth. The only sounds the hum of the motor and the occasional bump in the road. Lyra whispered, "Do you think they'll stop us?" "Maybe," Daniel admitted. "But if they do, we stay calm. Harris knows what to say." Lyra nodded and hugged her knees. The first checkpoint came sooner than Daniel expected. The truck slowed, then stopped. Muffled voices reached them from outside. A guard asking for identification, Harris replying casually. Then came the sound Daniel had feared. Boots walking toward the back of the truck. The latch clicked, and the door swung open. A beam of light swept across the crates. Daniel and Lyra stayed perfectly still, hidden in the shadows. The guard looked inside for only a moment before closing the door again. The truck started moving. Daniel let out a slow breath. "That was close," he murmured. They reached the market district without further trouble. The air here was busier, filled with the chatter of merchants and the smell of cooked food. "Stay close," Daniel told Lyra as they slipped out of the truck. Harris gave them a quick nod before driving off. The spaceport was only a few streets away, but between them lay the largest patrol zone in the city. Daniel led her through the crowded market stalls, weaving between shoppers and traders. The noise and movement gave them cover, but it also made it easier to get separated. At one point, Lyra's hand slipped from his. She froze, scanning the crowd, until she spotted Daniel's raised hand above the heads. She pushed through and grabbed it again, holding tight. As they neared the spaceport fence, Daniel pulled 2 items from his bag, a spare Relief Corps badge for himself, and a small, worn one for Lyra. "This will make you look like part of the aid team," he explained. "Keep your hood up and don't talk unless I tell you to." Lyra nodded, slipping the badge onto her jacket. The gate to the loading area was guarded by 2 officers. Daniel walked forward confidently, holding his badge up. "Delivery for the human transport ship Aurora Dawn," he said, his voice steady. The guard scanned the badge, then glanced at Lyra. "And her?" Daniel didn't miss a beat. "New volunteer. Came in from the North District, helping with the supply load." The guard's eyes lingered on her for a moment. Lyra kept her gaze down, her hands gripping the straps of her bag. Finally, the guard stepped aside. "Go ahead." Inside the loading area, Daniel felt the tension in his chest ease slightly. The Aurora Dawn was docked at the far end, its silver hull gleaming under the port lights. Workers moved crates up the ramp, their shouts echoing in the wide space. They joined the flow of people, blending in with the bustle. Lyra kept pace beside him, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of the massive ship. But just as they reached the ramp, A voice called out behind them. "Wait!" Daniel turned to see a familiar figure striding toward them, the pale blue welfare officer. His eyes locked on Lyra instantly. "You," the officer said coldly. "Step away from that man." Daniel's heart raced. Around them, the movement of workers slowed as the tension spread. Lyra froze, fear flashing across her face. Daniel stepped between her and the officer. "She's with me," he said firmly. "She is state property," the officer replied. "She is coming with me now." Daniel's mind raced. If they stopped here, it was over. But the ship's crew was already boarding supplies. If they could just get inside before the officer reached them. "Go," Daniel whispered to Lyra. She hesitated. "But now," he said, louder this time. Lyra darted up the ramp. The officer lunged forward, but Daniel moved to block him, forcing him to sidestep. "You're breaking protocol," the officer snapped. Daniel didn't answer. He stepped back just enough to keep the officer tangled in the moving workers. By the time the man broke free, Lyra had vanished into the ship's interior. Daniel followed quickly, his pulse hammering. Once inside, he pulled the door shut behind them, cutting off the noise of the port. Lyra stood in the corridor, breathing hard, but safe. For now. "We made it," she said in a shaky voice. Daniel managed a small smile. "Not yet. But we're close." Hook for Part 6. The officer makes one last attempt to stop them before departure, and Lyra finally steps into a future she never thought possible. The Aurora Dawn's engines hummed like a low heartbeat through the metal walls. The smell of fuel and fresh cargo filled the air. Crew members hurried past, securing crates and sealing compartments before departure. Daniel guided Lyra down the narrow corridor, keeping his voice low. "We need to stay out of sight until the ship leaves orbit. If anyone scans the passenger list before then, they'll know you're not registered." Lyra nodded, still catching her breath from their escape. Her eyes darted to every sound, the hiss of a pressure door, the clank of boots on the floor. They found an empty storage room near the back of the ship. The lights were dim, and the air was cool. Daniel closed the door behind them and leaned against the wall. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lyra asked, "Do you think the officer will try to come on board?" Daniel frowned. "If he does, we'll have to hope the captain refuses him. This is a human ship. They don't answer to colonial welfare officers. But if they find me," she whispered. "Then I'll tell them the truth," Daniel said firmly, "that you deserve to be free. And if they don't agree, we'll find another way." Something in his voice made Lyra believe him. She sat on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Minutes passed slowly. Then, from far down the corridor, they heard voices, loud, tense. Daniel's head snapped up. He recognized one voice instantly. "The welfare officer! Unauthorized alien aboard!" the officer was saying sharply. "She must be removed immediately." Another voice, deep and calm, replied, "This vessel is under human jurisdiction. Unless you have a Federation court order, you have no authority here." The officer's voice rose. "You are harboring state property." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. The footsteps came closer. Daniel glanced around the storage room. There was no other exit. He looked at Lyra. "Stay behind me, no matter what happens." The door slid open. The pale blue officer stood there, his narrow eyes locking on Lyra instantly. Behind him stood a human in a captain's uniform, tall, stern, with silver hair and a badge marked Aurora Dawn. "That's her," the officer said coldly. "She is coming with me." The captain's gaze shifted to Daniel. "Is this true? She isn't registered as a passenger?" Daniel straightened. "She's not cargo. She's a person. She's been kept in a colony camp without rights. I brought her here because she deserves a chance at life." "She is property of the state," the officer snapped. She is not property." Daniel interrupted, his voice like steel. She's a living being, and you know it. The captain studied them both for a long moment. The tension in the room was sharp as a blade. Finally, the captain turned to the officer. "This ship leaves in 3 minutes," he said calmly. "You are not on the passenger list. You will disembark now." The officer's face darkened. "You'll regret this." "Perhaps," the captain replied, "but not tonight." Reluctantly, the officer stepped back into the corridor. His glare lingered on Lyra. "You can run, little one, but the state never forgets." Then he turned and strode away. The captain looked at Daniel and Lyra. "Stay in this room until we're in deep space. After that, she's under my protection while aboard." Daniel nodded in gratitude. "Thank you, Captain." The door shut. Lyra let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hands trembled, but she smiled faintly. We made it?" Daniel smiled back, though his own hands were still shaking. "Yes. This time we really did." The next hours passed in a strange blur. The engines roared louder as the Aurora. Dawn lifted from the spaceport. The vibration in the floor grew, then softened as they entered orbit. Through a small porthole, Lyra watched the colony shrink below them. The gray rooftops, the dusty streets, the fences she had once thought she would never leave. Slowly, they became nothing more than a shadow on the planet's surface. She whispered, almost to herself, "I thought I would die there." "But you didn't," Daniel said gently. "You're here, and you're free now." When the captain finally gave permission for them to move about the ship, Lyra followed Daniel into the passenger deck. It was nothing like the colony. Clean walls, warm lighting, and people who walked without fear. Some passengers smiled as they passed, others barely noticed them. But no one shouted orders. No one tried to take her away. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt invisible in the best possible way, safe from unwanted eyes. Later, they sat together in the dining hall. The smell of warm bread and spiced stew filled the air. Daniel set a tray in front of her. "Eat," he said with a grin. "You need your strength." She hesitated at first, still unused to such kindness. But soon, she was eating slowly, savoring each bite. "This is good," she admitted softly. Daniel chuckled. "Wait until we reach the inner systems. The food gets even better there." When the meal was over, they returned to the quiet observation deck. Huge windows stretched from floor to ceiling, showing the endless black of space scattered with silver stars. Lyra stood close to the glass, her breath fogging it slightly. "It's so big," she said. "It is," Daniel agreed. "And now it's all open to you." She turned to him. "What will I do there? I don't know anything. I've never had anything." "You'll learn," he said. "You're stronger than you think, and you'll never have to face it alone." The hum of the engines was steady and calm. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the jacket Daniel had given her. It still smelled faintly of the rain from the night they had met. She thought of the cold alleys, the hunger, the days without hope, and then of this moment, standing in the quiet glow of a ship carrying her far from it all. "I never thought a human would care about me," she said quietly. Daniel's voice was gentle. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person to change everything." As the Aurora Dawn sailed deeper into the stars, the last traces of the colony vanished behind them. For Lyra, the journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had nothing when she met Daniel. Now, she had a future, and that was more than she had ever dared to dream.